Hello, friends. It's been a minute, hasn't it? We are happy to be back finally on the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. This is the week, well, we try to be weekly anyway, where we talk about the latest resources and highlights that have been shared in this week's Our Weekly issue at ourweekly.org. My name is Eric Nance, and yes, I'll get the elephant out of the room out of the way here for the minute here. Life has been slightly on the chaotic side for me in the month of March, not just for me, but also, unfortunately, my favorite hockey team, too, decided to collapse out of the playoffs. We'll save that for another day, too. But I'm back finally, albeit I'm not at 100% because I am just during my kids' spring break caught this bad virus that's been going around, and I'm on the mend. But if you're wondering why the baritone voice, that is why. So I will get through this, but luckily I'm not alone virtually, at least. My awesome co-host didn't forget me either. His name's Mike Thomas. How are you doing today, Mike?
Doing pretty well, Eric. It's good to be back. Is your favorite hockey team the Red Wings?
Oh, yeah, unfortunately. Yes.
I was at a Red Wings game on Tuesday last week, and we didn't even talk about this pre-show. I was in Detroit, and I saw the Red Wings lose in a penalty shootout in overtime to Columbus, I think.
Yep.
That was a tough
That was one of the nails in the coffin right there. Yeah.
It was a great game other than that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Great game. Which they should have had that effort weeks ago. But, yeah, not good.
Fun stadium.
At least yeah, nice. Oh, it's a great facility. Yeah. Too bad the team can't measure up to it. But, yeah, your close team is in the playoffs again. So we'll see what they do. But
yeah, we will see.
We will see. But, yeah, enough hockey talk because it is a bit of a sore subject at the moment. But let's talk about some not so sore subjects. We got a nice selection of highlights to talk to you about today. Actually, 2 art packages doing wildly different things, but I think will be very useful depending on your workflows. And this week's issue has been curated by Batul Almarzak, another one of our now longtime curators on the Our Weekly team. And as always, she had tremendous help from our fellow Our Weekly team members and contributors like all of you around the world with pull requests and other suggestions. So let's lead off with the first of our packages we're going to talk about today. Certainly in the realm of application development, especially in the realm of Shiny, this is something that Mike and I think can make heavy use of in future applications. And we are talking about this new R package called puppeteeR, maybe puppeteeR, who knows how they intend it to say. It is authored by Eli Edelin. Hopefully I'm saying that right. He is a data scientist at Barcode Nanotech, which it looks like a genetic type of biotech, which reminds me of my early days as a statistician analyzing a lot of proteomic and gene expression biomarker data. So a soft spot for that stuff. But what exactly is puppeteeR all about? Well, one thing that you've encountered if you've been in data science for a bit and you need to give, a way for users to review data, maybe reshape it a bit, get some summaries quickly. Let's not kid ourselves. The world of Excel is still vibrant. And one of the biggest capabilities of Excel for a lot of people is the capability to create pivot tables. The way that you can reshape variables and how they're laid out and generate summaries on the fly with drag and drop kind of interfaces for visualization. Well, it's great for, EDA, exploratory data analysis, so that you can just point this to somebody and put it maybe in an app or an HTML page, load a data set, and let them explore. That is basically what puppeteeR is under the hood. It is an HTML widget. But what's interesting is actually also plugging into WebAssembly as well. This is the first time I've kind of seen the two kind of combined in this way. I'll have to dive into more of the internals of this as I adopt this package maybe for future experiences. But this is wrapping an HTML binding called Perspective by Phanos, I believe. And we'll have a link to the actual upstream widget in the show notes. But this is where in the R package, you just load it in, and literally you can just run it with one function call called Perspective, feed in your data frame, maybe give it an optional height, and in the vignette that we'll link to in the show notes, you've got yourself an Explorer of, in this case, the empty card set. And I'm literally looking at my other screen right now. If I want to group by, say, the cylinder, I can just drag in the group by, boom, right there. I've got the data summarized in groups there. You can also change the visualization. It can by default do the data grid kind of layout, but you might want a heat map, a scatter plot. It's all configurable in this widget in the upper right corner, where it may default to data grid, but you can choose between these different visuals, and it obviously updates dynamically right on the spot. It has a lot of features you can tap into within the perspective our function call. You can choose what visual or what widgets by default. So in the next example, they got a heat map there of daily temperatures, it looks like, for the air quality data set. You can change the theme. You can change what is the group by default if you want. How the data split. I guess that's a different thing altogether. And you can also configure, different, additional settings, but all of it is a very drag and drop interface after you first render it so that the user can change settings as they see fit afterwards. It also has a sunburst visualization because in the author's words here, Hadley Wickham doesn't really like pie charts, so they did the best of both worlds. I guess apparently it was sunburst. So nice interactive tooltips when you hover over the different slices here based on what it looks like the state data set X77. And yes, for the Shiny users out there, much like other HTML widgets, you can just plug this in to a Shiny app and have a proxy interface to it so that you could keep track if the user decides to actually change the data inside it, which is another option you can do in this widget. You could get those changes back as a reactive object and be able to do stuff with that. You can also control how it can export data out via CSV or other means. Lots of potential here. I think it's looking really sharp. The author concludes in the vignette with what's next. The next release, in his words, says it will add WebSocket support. Ooh, that looks interesting. Apparently, a limitation right now is that data is flowing from the R session to the browser via HTML widgets, typical serialization with JSON. But the downside is if you have large data, that's going to pass through the actual R session memory, apparently. So if this can talk to WebSockets, which apparently this upstream widget speaks to, that may unlock much more bigger data that you can import. And by the way, speaking of data, I did gloss over this. I believe it does have support for importing data from Apache Arrow as well as Parquet files with the IPC serialization method. So I haven't played with that myself, but that might be interesting if you have Parquet files laying around to maybe support that. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff here. It looks like really robustly developed, and I may give this a try in my future Shiny app.
I thought this was super cool, and it's honestly kind of an area that I haven't seen addressed a ton. And admittedly, I know the Esquisse package for kind of drag and drop building charts. Not familiar with the GWalker package, which is also referenced here. But in terms of packages that can allow users to interactively build pivot tables, I think that's somewhat of an unmet need. I mean, we can obviously do some pretty incredible things with, GT or Reactable or even DT, but you're kind of making those choices most of the time for the user in terms of what they see. Maybe they can filter interactively on a column, but really, the full kind of pivot table functionality isn't there in those packages, and the way that kind of now we have this functionality in Perspective R. So I can absolutely see all sorts of use cases to provide this towards end users, and obviously the coolest thing about it is kind of the client-side nature of it, and the fact that we may be able to stick this, on like a GitHub Pages site without a true dedicated server on the back end, which would be awesome, particularly if we're able to get larger data sets in here, that this WebSocket support is able to be, stood up. And we always talk about it, right? DuckDB. If there's a way to somehow use DuckDB WASM in this package, and, some of the other maybe graphics packages that are more client side as well. I think that could be absolutely awesome. So really appreciate the work here by Eli. I really encourage folks to check out the package down site for this package and actually play around with some of the examples, because there is a lot of functionality in here to be able to not only manipulate these pivot tables, but change the themes, export the data to all sorts of different types of formats. Just a ton going on here. So I see 100 use cases for this today, and really glad that this one made the highlights.
Yeah, and even just that data editing side of it too. Even if nothing else, you want an editable widget, which has been trying to be cracked in many different of these more specific widgets for Excel, like, data, spreadsheet layouts. That's always been kind of hit or miss. So having this widget kind of do a lot of these things at once is quite powerful. And sometimes the downside of HTML widgets is, what is it picking you back off to upstream? Is that being actively maintained? Well, it does look like this perspective widget is not slowing down anytime soon. So I know that's bitten me in the past with cough, cough, our hands-on table and other ones too. So, the spicy take number one of probably the show. But there are other ones out there that have good intentions, but then it's just, not maintained anymore. So it's always something you want to, think about. But I think with this, you're in good hands. And good grief, this could be a great thing to put in a Quartal report, HTML based, as part of like a data exploration side of it. Maybe you got an actual report side of it, and give yourself less responsibility. Let the user explore it and make your code base a lot more elegant. I like that idea.
As long as your end user doesn't want your quota report in PDF.
Oh, let's
sorry.
Keep it positive.
Sorry.
Mike. I know.
It's the life I live. It's a sad
the life
life.
we live. I know. Well, I know, but at least Types is out there.
That's right.
Look at the bright side, buddy. Look at the bright side.
I try.
And up next, with the world we're in now, there's definitely a lot of movement in the AI's tooling in the role of the R community. And up next, we're going to look at a topic that I think we've explored in a previous highlight last year, and the idea of within your LLM experience or AI experience, most of the time, Mike and I were just bantering about this in the pre-show, we do interact with, say a provider like Claude or Copilot or whatnot, and we're kind of in this more single agent kind of workflow. We're asking it to help build this feature, maybe help debug this esoteric issue that we're encountering, maybe a test that's gone wrong, and helping it kind of back and forth with the prompting or whatnot. There seems to be a lot more attention these days on building multi-agent workflows. The idea that you give these agents different responsibilities and you have one overarching agent kind of being the person that's pulling the strings, as they say, or acting in that way. You could say, like, pulling along a bunch of puppets, right? Well, apparently that's what also the author of this next highlight package is thinking too, because the package we're about to talk about here in this multi-agent workflow is called puppeteeR. It's not maybe the puppeteer you and maybe thinking if you're in web development. This has nothing to do with the puppeteeR automation browser utility by Google, which I think I've had some experience with. Mike's maybe play with that too. This is, again, the orchestration of large language models and agents alongside that. This is authored by Arnold Kakas, who is a data analyst and apparently the founder of a startup called Quantix AI. So apparently he's knee-deep into the AI space. And I do admit, when I look at these multi-agent workflows and I first look at it, it can be kind of difficult for me to wrap my head around just what would this be useful for, and maybe what things this is not useful for. So I'm actually going to start with one of the vignettes that's in the package down site of the production use cases. I think that's the best place to start for someone like me that's thinking about, should I adopt this? What can I do this with? I really like this vignette because it's very transparent about, right off the bat, what is AI good for in terms of, say, automation and other benefits. In his opinion, one good use of AI is when you have highly unstructured inputs that are going in. If you are lucky enough to have more standard inputs, such as from a database, schema, query that thing up with SQL, right? But then when you have this unstructured stuff coming from documents, websites, internal things that you can write the code to scrape for, but you just are tired of doing that all the time, yeah, I think an agent can definitely help with that. And then also things to think about is whether you can actually review the output that the agents are working with. Human in the loop is often the phrase we coin here. You often want to make sure that you can look at that, and then basically if it's very cryptic, you may have bigger problems than just the AI stuff. But then other things about when not to use AI, such as when you haven't actually found a way to solve things kind of manually yet. That can be an issue if you don't even know where to go. You're trusting a lot of the AI to do that. But also maybe where you need very, very low latency. Sometimes these agents take a few minutes to run. That's just the nature of the beast. If you really need performance, you might need to do some more pre-trained classifiers, like in the machine learning space or whatnot. So there's some good narrative around what you can do to look at your cost benefit kind of analysis on here. So let's get to production use cases and how this package can help with that. There's a few here. I won't do all of them, but I think a couple that I resonate with is getting back to things that you may encounter, especially if you're ingesting data from multiple sources. That could be some document processing. Document can be a loose term here. Maybe it's a PDF, maybe it's a Word document, maybe it's stuff that's built from another pipeline that gets exported out. And you may need to figure out how to extract that information, classify it the appropriate way, and then to be able to maybe consolidate the relevant outputs of that into a more structured format. That can take a boatload of time, especially if you're doing like lit reviews and all this. So in the example that he has here, where there are multiple agents here that are defined by the package, and the way you first do this is with a schema. And within this, you kind of give it placeholder names for the different agents. So in this case, he's got one for document, for the categorization, the key facts, summary, and the log. Now, there could be as many or as few of these as you want, right? But then within each of these, he assigns them via the Elmer package a chat object that ties into a model of interest. So, for example, chat Anthropic could be tied to a few of these. So once you assign these chat objects to the various, sub-agents, and there's an agent called to do all that, you then, almost like a workflow of sorts, you define then a state graph of this scheme and then give it some functions to run. I guess these might be akin to tool calling in a sense for what these different parts of the process are going to do. So I'm still learning about this, but you apparently in this example can add a node in this workflow called classify and help that get into the innards of the document that it's importing. And then another one called extract, where it's basically going to get these facts that the agent gets out of that and then feed that into then a summarization step. And then how these things connect to each other. So this actually has some vibes of, say, a targets pipeline of sorts. Maybe obviously not quite the same, but you're adding the steps that these agents are going to perform and how they're networked together. And then you can compile this and then actually, with the documents, kind of loop through your ingestion function and then invoke everything after you ingest all the materials and get the results out. And maybe you write that out to a database like it does in this step. But that is where the key part of this package, it looks like, is that the agents are sharing the state of this workflow across the process, which again is vitally important in workflows like this. but it looks like puppeteeR is helping you orchestrate how that state is managed, where the agents actually do their work, and how to summarize all this again. So there's a lot of interesting things in that use case. Another one that caught my eye is the code reviewer. We have seen, obviously GitHub's done this a lot, where you can have, like via Copilot or whatnot, you send a PR, it'll trigger a code review on the spot in your GitHub action, in your pull request issue, and it will find you issues. So in the use case here, it's kind of similar, where maybe you don't want the senior engineer that's approving all the PRs to have to review the code that might have some more of the minutia that is more easily solved, or at least more easily pinpointed by perhaps, quote unquote, someone else. So you want something that's a little more streamlined to do that first pass. And that's where, in this example, we have an agent manager of sorts that's going to help coordinate the code review with multiple sub-agents. And in this case, it's looking at things like security, performance, style, but then delegate those various subtasks to the relevant sub-agent, which he defines in the workflow here as like an agent for security, an agent for performance with little prompt for the instructions, and then maybe the style if it needs to adhere to a style guide. And then the example here, it's reading a string or an R script with a function call, and then it invokes that review sub-agents to do it all, look at the review text, and then he does an API call to GitHub to post that pull request review comment into the PR. That, I think, is pretty neat, right? Because when you have a large-scale project, maybe you have a newer team member or resource that's helping with a part of it, and you've given them some training, right? You give them like the guidance documents or the developer guide or whatnot. And, they're doing their part, but then maybe they just miss something here and there. And that's where having this first pass, I think, is save a lot of time, help them update it on the spot. And then you, as the architect of that project, look at the big ticket items. Like, are you adhering to what the specs say, or are you doing what the feature really asks for? I think that's a really powerful thing. So there's a lot more we can dive into here. The other part that you may be thinking about is, this sounds all great, Eric, but how do I get this in production? Well, there is a deployment to production section here about different ways you might trigger this and things you could think about. Whether it's an HTTP type of request to trigger it via, say, a Plumber API call, whether it's a automated schedule via cron or sort, whether it's part of a pipeline, an ETL kind of pipeline, and then what kind of output you're going to surface it, whether it's a database, maybe it's an update to a Slack channel thread, who knows? You get a lot of flexibility there, but I think there's a lot of interesting things to draw upon here. And I definitely, when I'm in the case where I need to do a multi-agent kind of workflow, I'm definitely going to take a look at puppeteeR to try some cool things out with. So yeah, Mike, how do you feel about pulling the strings with puppeteeR here?
I was initially like a little skeptical, as I am about all AI agentic type of stuff. But probably the biggest thing that I really, really appreciate is, as you mentioned, it's this vignette on use cases. So if you take a look at the package down site and go to production use cases, there's a bunch of different very practical use cases laid out with the code to do so. And it has kind of flipped my perspective a little bit and made me, a little warmer towards potentially standing up some of this agentic stuff with multi-agentic stuff, in my own day-to-day work. So, I'm really appreciative of that part of it, because I feel like a lot of times we see the shiny, buzzwordy type of stuff around, agentic software, and not a lot of, additional context that would help us bridge the gap towards our actual day-to-day work. And I am seeing some, really interesting stuff here that's been put together. And taking a look at that GitHub repository, it looks like this is obviously very object-oriented, which I think, a lot of these packages like Elmer have that kind of feel. This is built largely with R6 from what I could see in the GitHub repository. And again, with that idea that you kind of build this state graph where you have multiple agents defined. And if you take a look at the code, which I think is, again, built on top of Elmer, it's very easy to read. I mean, it's very digestible, which is really nice. And obviously, each agent has its own unique role and set of tools, and they kind of act in this shared mutable workflow state. So you could have these potential sequential workflow patterns where you have this sort of a chain, as you mentioned, where you have a coder writes code first, then a reviewer critiques it, and then some sort of a writer summarizes it with obviously some kind of a supervisor or manager that dynamically decides which agent should be invoked and handle which specific subtask at which time, which is a real orchestration or puppeteering endeavor. And multiple agents could potentially argue different sides of a topic while a judge agent makes the final call. I think that's kind of an interesting use case for, again, these situations obviously where the rules of the system are not well known enough to the point where we would actually need to introduce AI, but perhaps it's fuzzy enough that you may want to have multiple agents take a pass at it and provide their best guess, and then kind of amalgamate those all together or aggregate those together into sort of a final decision. Yeah, I like the way that a lot of this is laid out for human in the loop at a point in the process, and this sort of checkpointer that's built into the package that saves the state at every step, which allows us as developers to pause these workflows for human approval and then potentially resume thereafter, or resume after a failure takes place. One of the other things that I really like in terms of control is this cost limit function. It's called cost_limit. It prevents runaway costs, and we all know that these agentic workflows in particular can chew up a lot of tokens, particularly when you have multiple calls to these LLMs, each for one for each agent and over in a loop until a particular task is getting done. And there's also a max_turns function that allows you to, I think, set sort of how much back and forth you could potentially have, how many iterations before you're kind of asking the workflow to stop so that you don't run up those costs. And it seems like the costs are kind of creeping up a little bit across these providers these days. So I've seen a lot of things out there lately where, we tried to replace some data engineer or data analyst who was, making $75,000 a year, and we're spending $75,000 a year in, tokens to this AI. So is it really a great, is it really going to be a great way to replace folks? I don't know. And maybe that's some of our hope here for those of us that are software developers worried about AI. And I also love the visualization tools that allow you to kind of visualize this graph structure before execution, monitor the workflow as it runs. I think all of this is really important, and really, really impressed by the depth of functionality in this package and the syntax and ease of use. So really appreciate Arnold's work on this, and I can't wait to try it out.
Yeah, I've really intrigued by the documentation here. Yeah, the vignettes are well written. I think they're, and the API, if you will, of opting in to define these agents. Yeah, this is very readable. That is an important thing to me. You bring up a funny story, and as I think of multi-agent stuff, I think of all the stuff I've heard in the podcasts I listen to and online about the OpenClaw utility for building multi-agents on your system and having like a chat interface to trigger certain things on it. There was somebody that was trying that, and then they fed in as like the LLM provider their Anthropic key because they thought, well, just try this out. It racked up like approaching $1,000 after just a day or two of usage. And like, oh no, I got to pull the brakes on that. So I am very appreciative of the cost function here. But also, again, based on Elmer, this is the nice thing I see here. We're not reinventing the wheel here. With Elmer, I want to stress again, with each of these sub-agents, you can change what model it uses, what provider it uses. And with the recent optimism on the newest open source, or I should say openly available models that you can self-host, such as the new Quen model, as well as the recent Gemma 4 from DeepMind, you've got yourself some utilities for some of these tasks that you don't need the full-blown Claude Opus to do. You've got a lot of flexibility here, which will help you control your costs quite a bit. Of course, that gets into the whole hardware stuff. But we are seeing some promising benchmarks back on the Gemma 4 side of things that even on quote-unquote normal hardware, you'll be able to get an answer relatively quickly. And that's a huge win for those of us that want to have more control and not feel like it's Claude or OpenAI or bust. Like, we want to be able to tap into the innovations that are happening in the open model side of it. And that's starting to get some attention, but puppeteeR, like Elmer on top of, it'll let you choose that and be able to control that processing on your own.
And not to mention security, right?
That
you
too.
can pass anything you wanted essentially to Gemma 4 if you've got it set up locally and not necessarily need to worry about your prompts going out and being stored in a database somewhere, even though they say they're not going to train on it. They are going there.
Yeah, whether you like it or not, they're going there. And heck, even something that caused a bit of a stir is if you're a user of GitHub and in particular Copilot, you may have seen a note from GitHub about, we're probably starting at this certain time. We're going to use your data for more training. And if you don't want to do that, you got to opt out. So the landscape's changing. As you said, Mike, these frontier providers, not to go on another spicy hot take, they are evolving their pricing structure. And it is definitely getting a little more difficult out there, depending on your use case. So it's always good to have an open mind on what you're using for your latest LLM provider.
I can tell you that Catchbrook Analytics will not be going the way of Allbirds this week, at least.
I'm happy to hear that. Neither is my org, apparently. So, it's crazy stuff. But
people need shoes. I guess you need data centers more.
Yep. Don't get me started on what they were trying to do to spin up a data center on apparently a site of a circus or something. There's all sorts of stuff going on there. But
that's just like poetic,
yeah, it is. Yeah, it's all circus at the end, right? Yeah. But one thing that hopefully is not such a circus, is our weekly issue. We got a lot of great content for you. Lots of great additional content. We don't have time to dive into all of it, but Batul's put together a great issue. I will say a little bit of a teaser that we'll dive into something that I'll be exploring later in May. There is an insightful post from the esteemed Bruno Rodriguez, who's been a frequent contributor to our weekly, about building your own programming language. Yes, he has built his new programming language called T, about this concept of reproducibility with Nix and orchestrating all this together. I'm very intrigued by this, to say the least. Not that I think ours is going away anytime soon, but just the ideas around this. And I'm excited to say he will be joining myself and Jared Wolfolk on the recently revamped our Pharma Hangout sessions in May to talk about a lot of his ideas. So be on the lookout for that. I'll be sharing details about that on the appropriate channels. But other than that, lots of great stuff there.
I'll throw another one out there just because we haven't been able to chat on the podcast in a few weeks.
Yeah.
GG Light from eWay. Did you see that
yes,
come through?
I did see that.
Very much tagged as experimental, but ggplot style package for interactive data visualization based upon, I guess, the G2 JavaScript library or something like that. So looks really cool.
I'm going to put that in the show notes. I saw it come through. I'm like, eWay's really doing the light down a step further. Very great to see him. He is back to, he's easy for me to say. He is back to blogging now. So lots of great posts from eWay, a good friend of ours. But yeah, lots of posts from everybody in this issue. Lots of great packages and the like. So we just wanted to give those quick shout outs. But also we unfortunately we were laid off a bit, but we are hopefully be back in regular cadence here from this point on. And we definitely appreciate your support, if nothing else, for sharing the word about our weekly. And in fact, speaking of the word of our weekly, one last little plug on Good News Front. I did hear back. I have been accepted to do a lightning talk at PositConf about the 10-year history of our weekly and our future in the project. Yay!
That's awesome.
So lightning talks, they go by quick, and sometimes I prefer that's even more than a regular talk, but I'm excited to be a part of that and advocate on behalf of our great team here. And yes, Mikey will be definitely featured in that talk as well. You didn't pay me to say that. We'll just say that up front.
Lost for words. Can't wait.
Awesome. So with that, yeah, it's that good news. But also, like I said, the audience participation has been really helpful for this project. If you see a resource that you'd like to be seen or you'd like to have seen on the next issue, we're a pull request away. That's going to be a key feature of my talk, is the open nature of our weekly. Just a pull request away. We have a template right there in the pull request template for you to follow, and the curator for the upcoming issue will be glad to review and hopefully get that merged in. And we also love to hear from you out there. I know I've been late in replying back to some of you, wondering where the heck's been the podcast. We are back. I will reply back to you all. But you can find me on Blue Sky, where I am at our podcast at bsky.social. I am also at Mastodon at our podcast at podcastindex.social. And I'm on LinkedIn. Just search my name. You'll see me working around there. And Mike, where can the listeners find you?
I'm somewhere on Blue Sky. I got a new laptop, so I have to double check my username. I think it's Mike-Thomas at bsky.social.
That's what my show notes say, so we're good there.
Does that sound correct? Or you can find me on LinkedIn. If you search Ketchbrook Analytics, KETCHBROOK, you can see what I'm up to.
Yeah, congrats on the new hardware. I was just telling Mike I got some new hardware too that will make production a bit easier too. And once I get back to 100%, I can actually try to set that up with Nix and all the fun stuff on top of it. But our fun time is ending here. I got to get back to the day job stuff, so we will close out episode 223 of our weekly highlights. We thank you for joining us again. Again, sorry for the layoff, but we'll be back regular from this point on. And yes, I'm pretty much guaranteed that we will be back with another episode next week.